not being in any sort of combat role. A lot to talk about here. We're going to bring in Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, retired from the U.S. Army and senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. He conducted cross-border raids into Pakistan from Afghanistan back in 2003, so some experience on the ground there. And Michael Hanlon also has a lot of experience in Afghanistan, director in foreign policy research for the Brookings Institution. So nice to have you both. You've both spent some time in the country from very different perspectives. So that's going to really add to the conversation that we're going to have now. Lieutenant Colonel, what do you think of the mission as the president has laid it out?
This is absolutely the right way to go. We've got to focus on the reconciliation process. The president brought that up. We cannot do that for them. I've talked about this in my book, Operation Dark Heart. This is very much like the Northern Ireland process, where you have two elements of the same religion, in this case, two tribes, two elements of the same tribe, the Pashto, fighting each other. And we've really got to do the job of helping that go in that direction. With that said, the president's correct also in maintaining the anti-terrorism mission. I agree with John McCain. We cannot go to 5,000 troops. That's much too low. We are at I would say, the sweet spot right now, the Goldilocks spot, about 10,000 troops with an offensive mission. And let me be clear on this. The troop level has never been relevant. The issue has always been, what are the mission of our troops there? What are they doing? Being there to essentially stop ISIS is going to be very critical. ISIS is now in about 10 provinces in Afghanistan. They're controlling about 7. This is a critical issue, as well as the fact that we don't want al-Qaeda coming back. And I think a real quick shout out here, we see General Campbell on the ground in Afghanistan hitting all the right marks, doing the right job. And General Joe Dunford just took over as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was commander on the ground there up until last year. I think we have the right men at the right time doing the right things to actually, I think, get us a win out of the situation.
But, Michael, when you talk to actual veterans who have taken combat roles in Afghanistan, some have described what they're reading of the president, this was earlier today before the full announcement, as a Band-Aid on a gaping chest wound. They really don't feel that 10,000 troops is going to make a difference and don't like the fact that they are in the same role of just training and doing some counterterrorism. What about that number of 10,000? Is it really enough to make a difference? And has our mission so far in those efforts been successful enough to want to invest and continue them?
Well, first of all, Jenna, thanks for having me on. I agree with the Colonel. I think there were a lot of good things we heard from President Obama today. The policy, I think, that he announced is generally correct. I thought it was an excellent speech. 5,500 troops a year from now may indeed be too small, but I'm more encouraged by the fact that we're not going to rush down to that number, and we're going to preserve a physical infrastructure with the 3 key bases the President talked about. Bagram, which is near the capital of Kabul, Jalalabad, which is in the east, near some of the areas the Colonel may have been fighting a decade ago, and Kandahar in the south. And this gives us a lot of capability across the full spectrum of intelligence, training, counterterrorism. And there also is one more mission. The President didn't mention this, but it's obvious from the recent activity in Kunduz, including the tragedy of the bombing of the hospital. We are occasionally coming to the help of Afghan forces when they are in a pinch in tough tactical fights. I think we should continue to do that. The President doesn't like to talk about that, but it's actually something we're doing, and I think we should continue. And for that reason, people who say 5,500 may be too few, I take them seriously. We should have that debate over the next year. But the good news is, if you preserve this infrastructure, you've got flexibility, and so will the next president. I think that range of up to 10,000 troops is actually a very formidable and appropriate U.S. capability going forward.
Tony, why do you think this makes us safer today?
Well, 2 reasons. First, we recognize before 9/11 that the al-Qaeda folks were able to use the Taliban in Afghanistan as a base of operations. There's no reason to believe that that won't happen again. I know for a fact that al-Qaeda has moved back into Afghanistan based on discussions with the Pentagon and intelligence analysts I highly support and recognize their expertise. With that said, though, we have to recognize we can't be everywhere we do everything for the Afghans. So this is where I think our focus on anti-terror with a 10,000-man force. When I was there in 2003, we were very effective. We were winning the war by the fact we had a very low footprint. The Afghans were mostly in charge of what was going on, and I think that's the right answer here. The right answer is to push them into the front, and I agree with Michael. The Kunduz thing, while tragic, is exactly how we should be fighting the war. The hospital getting hit is bad, but us working with the Afghans, them in the lead, us supporting them on the periphery is the right way to go. It's their country, and I think, again, we cannot abandon our interests because we don't want to have that safe haven thing set up again, but at the same time, we have to push them forward to reconciling with the Taliban and moving forward with their own progress.
Michael, a two-part question again, and I always do this to you, so I apologize. It's complicated questions for a complex topic, but I'm curious if you could comment a little bit about what Tony just said about why this makes us safer. When it feels that the threats that are more immediate to the United States are in Syria, why do we keep investing troops in Afghanistan? And take us out beyond just a year. Take us 10 years. Will we still have 10,000 troops on the ground in Afghanistan? And is that really the scenario we're in at this point?
On the second question, we might be still near 10,000, or at least, let's say, the 5,500 number that the president envisions as the goal. We might be. And frankly, I think the magnitude of the global jihadist threat, or the al-Qaeda-ism threat, with now ISIL joining the ranks, is serious enough that we may just have to recognize we are in a long war, a generational war. And if we can do that with pieces of presence around the world that are a few thousand troops here and there, fundamentally, that's an affordable cost. I mean, it's tragic when we lose people. It's more than any of us would like to see. But in the grand scheme of a major geostrategic challenge to our country's security, I would support it even 10 years from now if it were still necessary. Obviously, that depends on circumstances, so please have me back in 2025 and we'll talk about it then. And as for Syria, I think that you make a fair point, but I don't think this is an either-or proposition. We need to ramp up our role in Syria. We're not doing enough now. The president's policy there is not as successful as it's been in Afghanistan, even though Afghanistan itself is a mixed outcome at best, but it's still a passable one, and I think we should try to preserve that relative progress. In Syria, we have no such real progress to report. We need a much invigorated capability, but I don't see this as either or. We've got to have policies that are tailored to each country's conditions, and we're going to have to wage this broader conflict on multiple fronts.
It'll be interesting if this is, I don't want to say a sliding scale, but if the president, in conceding to doing this, perhaps does become more aggressive in other parts of the world. It's hard to know at this point, but it'll be interesting to see what goes on from here. Tony and Michael, great to have you both. Appreciate your perspective. Certainly more on this.